media.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to The Fringe. What can we say about Crystia Freeland? She's twitchy, she's incompetent, she lies like any member of government, but she's certainly not worthy of holding the two titles that she has in the House of Commons, whether that's Deputy Prime Minister or the major one that we're going to discuss here today, Minister of Finance for the Liberals. Now, as she unveiled the Liberals' budget last week, many questions came to my mind. One in particular is the housing crisis that we're facing in this country. And that's one thing I want to discuss here today. But before we get into it, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to take a moment to thank everybody who's helped this channel reach its 30,000 subscriber goal. It's been an amazing landslide of an adventure as we slowly build this large fringe majority up here on this channel. So I thank each and every one of you who have joined us. Those of you who are enjoying this content, make sure to hit the subscribe button and let's build the channel up to its next milestone of 50,000 subscribers and see how quickly we can get there. Now, as for the budget, with Crystia Freeland, one thing that's always crossed my mind with this housing accelerator fund that ministers like Sean Fraser have come out and said that it actually builds no homes, and we're going to get into a little bit that before the end of the video, is that Pierre Poilievre has been campaigning on the cycle that he's planning to offer incentives for cities to build 15% more every year in order to get federal funding. And I think that that's kind of a good carrot on the stick in order to supply motivation to municipalities to build at an accelerated rate and actually show results. One thing I'll say about the person interviewing Crystia Freeland that we're going to take a look at today is Vasi Kapelos from CTV. Now, I've had my opinions in regards to government-paid shill prostitutes, but Vasi Kapelos, while sometimes she'll kiss the butts of certain MPs, most of the time she comes out full force and she stays relatively biased when it comes to things and has an open mind, and she's willing to ask tough questions. Unlike CBC or any other outlets, I can actually garner some respect towards Vasi Kapelos for what she does here. Now, she sat down with Crystia Freeland to go over the budget, and one of those things, and one of the major talking points of this interview is the housing crisis that's in this country. So I'm going to let Vasi take it away here in the interview. I'll be stopping from time to time to address where I feel some of these issues are, but let's get it started because, boy, Crystia Freeland sure is sweating in this interview, and it's worth every minute. Grab your popcorn, ladies and gentlemen. Let's dive in.
My first question to you is based on the response you offered to Pierre Poilievre's statement in the House of Commons. Why is the fight you want with the Conservatives about taxing the rich?
My focus is not on the Conservatives. My focus is on Canadians. And our budget today was about meeting the moment for Canadians. It was about fairness. It was about saying Canadians have real needs right now. They need more homes built faster. They need life to be more affordable. They need us to invest in the economic capacity of the country. They need us especially to do it for fairness for younger Canadians who are struggling to get ahead. And they need us to do it in a fiscally responsible way. That is the plan that we put forward today. And it's going to be up to the Conservatives to say whether they support it or not.
But the focus that you drew in your response was very much, for example, on the new tax, the changes to capital gains tax. And I'm wondering, did you need to even introduce those changes if you had acknowledged that the housing crisis was what it was at an earlier juncture? Would you need to be spending so much on increasing the supply if you had realized perhaps earlier that you could have deflated demand to better impact prices and not raise taxes in any way?
Canada is a growing country, and I think that is a great thing. I think as a country, we have been under-investing in housing for a generation. So I am really glad that our government is investing massively in housing, is investing massively in infrastructure to support housing. And I am glad to see provinces and municipalities and also the private sector and not-for-profits really getting involved. I think it's great that Canada is growing. It's just really important to be sure that a growing country has enough homes, that we have homes for young Canadians, that we have homes for new Canadians. That is about fairness, and that's what we're doing.
Wasn't that your government's job over the last 8 years? When you say for generations, governments have been under-investing, doesn't that make your own government culpable?
Our government has been focused on housing and focused on infrastructure since we first formed government. The challenge is more acute now. It's more acute in Canada, and it is more acute around the world. And we're stepping up, and we're
Now, one of the things I want to point out right away and talk about is, in fact, the hilarious nature of Vasi saying that Chrystia Freeland's only been in office for 8 hours and then slips up and says 8 years. Now, the way this budget was presented, it would definitely state that the Liberals behave like they've only been in office for 8 hours, because it was a disaster of a budget. There was nothing beneficial to Canadians in this. In fact, we've seen with the Housing Accelerator Fund program that nothing is being done. And again, we're going to get into that a little bit more later in terms of facts from MPs. But one of the things I found most astounding is that every question Vasi seems to ask Freeland in this, you'll notice that Freeland takes a minute to take a breath and is kind of stunned because she can't believe that a CTV paid prostitute is actually gunning at her with giving these questions. Now, this isn't the first time we've seen these kind of exchanges between Vasi and Chrystia Freeland, but it's funny more and more every time I see it. Now, part of the thing about the housing that Chrystia Freeland mentions here that, again, I want to touch on is that she talks about fairness. She talks about meeting the demand for not only current Canadians, but Canadians coming to the country. And this is an important thing to look at when we look at the Liberals' plan and why it's going to fail in Canada. Because this article, and we're not going to get into the article, but I just wanted it here for numbers' sake, that Liberals unveil the ambitious housing plan to build 3.87 million homes by 2031. If you follow the amount of illegal refugees, or asylum seekers we'll call them, that are sitting across in cities right now, in tent cities, in the streets, in hotels, under the taxpayers' bill, it's more and more evident that we're growing and growing and growing. There is a crisis. There's little supply. There's tons of demand, even for apartments, condominiums, you name it, around every major city. It's becoming more and more challenging. To build 3.87 million homes by 2031 is a very ambitious plan. The biggest problem with that is that you have people who currently live in the country and people who are coming to the country. Now, I don't want to sit here and talk like I don't know anything about numbers that are coming out, but let's take a look at what last year's statistics were for migrants coming to Canada. In 2023, over 437,000 new permanent residents, along with over 604,000 temporary workers, were admitted and helped fill job vacancies in healthcare, trades, technology sector, and helped rebalance the country's aging population. The thing here is that's 1 million people, and people are going to say, Fringe, there's over 500,000 temporary workers. The thing here is that those people still need somewhere to live, whether it's a rental property, whether it's a property that the business owns in order to house workers. There's multiple avenues that this goes. The biggest problem is even if we only take 437,000 people into account, when we look at asylum seekers, last year, referred were 137,000, pending 156,000. If you were just to take the 137 and the 437, that's roughly 600,000 people a year. If you multiply that over the next 7 years, 8 technically, to get to 2031, you're looking at almost 4 million homes that need to be built just to house permanent residents and immigrants coming here seeking asylum. So this 3.87 isn't going to benefit any Canadians. Now, that isn't the only problem. We're going to get into more of that. I'm going to get into why their contracts are going to fail. But let's listen to a little bit more of the questions and get a better scope as to why this incompetent government can't match up to not only their budget, but the questions of an actual journalist giving them to them.
I think the really important thing to take away from this budget is we recognize that this is a pivotal moment for young Canadians. It's a pivotal moment for millennials. It's a pivotal moment for Gen Z. In our pre-budget tour going across the country, I've heard from so many people, young Canadians themselves, but as much their parents and grandparents, saying, I want my kid and my kid's friends to be able to afford their own home. I think we all believe that, and we know it takes an activist government which is investing, and crucially, it takes a government that's prepared to lead the charge and change
But
the
why
mindset of the country. Cut through the red tape, get municipalities to accept gentle zoning. That is all happening. I'm very, very optimistic.
Right, but why weren't you prepared and willing to do that in 2021, for example, when the average price of a home was already 97% higher than 2015? Were you talking to people in Toronto in the age group that you're referencing 2 years ago who thought they could afford a home there, or in Vancouver who thought they could afford a home then? Why didn't you try and meet the moment then to avoid having to spend as much as you are now to try and meet the moment now?
Well, 2021, of course, was still peak COVID. So the
it kept going up in 2022.
No, so yeah, but you
up.
referred to 2021. That was peak COVID. There were a lot of distortions through that period, and some of those economic distortions are part of the reason that housing is such a challenge. I think the important thing is to be meeting the moment now. The important thing is to be doing everything we can, to pulling every lever, to pressing every button to get more homes built. That is what our government is doing. Our government is also really focused on affordability for all Canadians, and our government is focused on investing on productivity and growth of the economy. And the way we're going to do it is pursuing fairness for all Canadians, especially young Canadians. That's the plan we presented today. I think that's what Canadians want and need.
Why are you so solely focused, I should say, on the supply side? And I'll bring it back to the issue of demand, because the portion, or the number rather, of temporary residents in this country has doubled as of January over the last 2 years. Again, not something that happened overnight, happened over the past few years. Your government has just now decided to address the temporary stream of immigration. Is there any consideration to looking to the permanent stream temporarily while the housing crisis is as acute as it is? Or is the plan solely to spend more to attempt to drive the supply of housing? Why not tackle demand in a more meaningful way?
Oh, I think that's a really good question. And I do think it's important for us to be sure that housing supply and the number of people in Canada match up.
Now, despite fairness that Crystia Freeland keeps talking about, especially when you mention cities like Vancouver and Toronto, especially in Vassie's questions, are that availability isn't just the issue. It's a matter of our younger generation that Crystia Freeland brings up, being able to even afford to get into these homes in the first place. Pierre Poilievre has stated multiple times that cities like Toronto require people to save for roughly 20 to 25 years before they can afford a down payment, meaning the average young person in their early 20s wouldn't be able to purchase a home till they're in their mid to late 40s. This is a huge issue. The only way at this point that anyone's going to be able to have any form of home ownership would be row housing, sixplexes, fourplexes. The list goes on, because when you have somebody like Pierre Poilievre even running to say that he's going to incentivize the building of homes, the issue at the end of it becomes affordability. And there's 68% roughly of Canadians who own their homes countrywide right now. And you can't campaign on the fact that, hey, everyone, I'm going to make housing so available that everyone else who's invested for their equity, for their long-term investments in their homes, are suddenly going to lose half of their mortgage value or half of their equity value on their homes. Nobody would vote for that contender. So as prices will maybe fluctuate, I don't see any moment in either party's plans where housing is going to become affordable. The biggest problem that gets hit on the head here that needs to be addressed is immigration. And before everybody comes with their torches and pitchforks and says, hey, this country was built on immigrants, of course it was. But the biggest problem that I've mentioned multiple times over in this country in particular is that we need to look after Canada first. We have to solve our own problems. I've often compared it to when you're on an aircraft and the oxygen masks drop from the top of the plane and they say you're to secure your own mask for your own safety before you can help your child. It's the same situation in Canada right now, where we need to start looking after ourselves. We need to look at the reality of the situation and start telling migrants, we're sorry, Canada's closed until further notice, until we can get our problems under wraps. But let's take a look at some of the other questions formed her way, and then we're going to talk a little bit about why this plan is going to fail.
And that's why the work that Mark Miller has been doing over the past few months is so important. Let's remember, change in visa requirements for Mexicans, a cap on international students, a huge source of temporary residents, and a cap on the number of temporary residents. I think that there is more work to do when it comes to temporary residents, particularly when it comes to temporary foreign workers. So I absolutely agree that.
Is it fair to say your government will do more on that side?
I absolutely agree that that is important. I do, though, want to say more broadly, I believe in a growing Canada. I think that that is a strength of our country, that we're able to grow our population. That is a huge strength of ours when it comes to the demographic challenge so many countries are facing. We need to be sure that our housing supply and our population match up. And I think that is what our government is absolutely focused on doing. That is what Canadians want and need.
Do you
The biggest problem and hiccup statement with Crystia Freeland on any of those statements is, again, that it's more word salad. It's more jargon coming out of the mouth of the Liberal government. She keeps saying she wants her cake and eat it too. She wants to make sure that things are affordable, but at the same time, she's all for growth in the country. This is, again, where the Liberals fail on every notch. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I've ever agreed with the Liberals, especially Justin Trudeau's Liberals, but when you think about an economic plan, you have to have key infrastructure that makes sense in said budget, and there has to be money in a budget before you can actually call it a budget. The Liberals, of course, are spending more money right now on interest payments through banks than we're spending on healthcare. This new budget is nothing short of destructive. Now, one of the articles I want to focus on here are actually from the National Post, of all places, talking about MPs and their budget fail on housing, because this is where things are going to go down the line. Despite billions in spending announced in this year's federal budget, Westminster's Conservative members of Parliament don't believe the Liberals' new housing initiatives will help address the country's housing shortage. The Liberals' ninth budget since they took power in 2015 is a $40 billion program providing loans to build apartments, $14 billion to build and repair affordable homes, and $4 billion for the infamous Housing Accelerator Fund, among other measures, which, of course, Sean Fraser admitted while in committee that the Housing Accelerator Fund actually doesn't get homes built, and we've heard testimony from Pierre Poilievre and multiple others stating that it's nothing more than a photo opportunity for people to make it appear that homes are being built. In a phone interview from Ottawa, Dauphin Swam River Neepawa MP Dan Mazier said despite all Housing Accelerator Fund agreements between the federal government and municipalities so far, the program has yet to build any houses. There we go. Mic drop. Despite the talk, and they announce money, but they can't complete the objective, Mazier said. We're building fewer houses than we did in the 1970s, when we had half the population. He said that the country must give rural municipalities, provinces, and developers a pathway to building houses. And that, again, is the red tape that Pierre Poilievre keeps talking about removing. Brandon Souris MP Larry Maguire laid blame for part of the housing issues the country is facing at the feet of the Liberals' spending, which was said to be driven up interest rates through inflationary deficits, making it harder to buy a home. And again, you'll remember Justin Trudeau's infamous quote during the Freedom Convoy, or shortly around the time of the Freedom Convoy on lockdowns, saying that interest rates are at historic lows, Glenn. I mean, this man never once thought that inflation and printing money would ever result in this kind of a crisis in the country. We've been saying all along that the Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, is not worth the cost, Maguire said by phone. He's doubled the rent in the last 5 years, he's doubled the mortgage payments, and he's doubled the down payments to purchase a home. The local MP argued that the Conservatives plan to require cities to increase home building by 15% per year in order to receive federal funding would be better incentive for municipalities to eliminate bureaucracy from housing developments than the Liberal program. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why this budget is doomed to fail. And we all knew it was going to fail anyways, but this is why the Liberals' budget makes no sense, why it's not going to go anywhere, why houses aren't going to get built. This is science on it. No experts needed, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be the expert today, but that's okay. You're the experts for watching this video. But one thing I wanted to point out is that this is why, again, everything's falling apart at the seams. Why it's only going to get nastier in the House of Commons, especially as we get into oncoming weeks before the vote to approve the budget goes through through. Of course, we know Jagmeet Singh has been teeter-tottering, and he's, of course, going to side with Justin Trudeau. But as, again, the snakes come out and the heads start to attack each other, it's going to be very, very interesting to watch as time goes on before Parliament takes its break in the summer. Let me know what you guys think down below in terms of Crystia Freeland's wacky budget and the housing issues. Do you believe that immigration is the issue? Because I sure do. Let me know your thoughts down below. And again, if it's your first time here, I hope you find that this video is worthy of your subscription. Make sure to join us here on the channel every Friday night at 8 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Pacific for Friday Night Fringe, where we talk about all these things that go on this week, as well as everything coming up in the week ahead, and a little bit of back and forth with the community. I look forward to seeing each and every one of you in those streams and hearing what you guys have to say outside of making these videos. And I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day and enjoyed this video. I'll catch you on the next one.